Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're unpacking one of the most fascinating and honestly, most consequential concepts in modern history, state legibility. Have you ever noticed how we, as human beings, naturally create these wonderfully messy, complex systems, but large institutions, especially states, always try to force those systems into neat, orderly little boxes? Well, we're going to look at exactly how and why states simplify the world and what actually happens when they decide to just ignore the messy realities of nature and human society. All right, let's dive right into this.
Seriously, just look around you for a second. From the grid layout of our city streets to the standardized testing in our schools, our modern world is completely obsessed with the grid. But why? Why do states love straight lines so much? Have you ever wondered why, whenever a state encounters a complex, organic system, its very first instinct is to flatten it out into something simple, uniform, and easily measurable?
Take a look at this. It's a perfectly managed poplar forest in Tuscany. It's super striking, isn't it? Honestly, it almost looks like an optical illusion, or like a giant barcode. This right here is the ultimate utopian dream of state legibility. It's a landscape that has been entirely stripped of its natural chaos, completely redesigned so that it can be instantly understood, measured, and managed by someone sitting in a central office. It's beautiful, sure, but in a very sterile way. And as we're going to see, this kind of extreme simplification comes with some massive hidden costs.
Section 1. The Scientific Forest. To really understand the origins of this grid mindset, we need to travel back to the 18th and 19th century Germany. Think about the profound contrast in how two totally different groups view the exact same patch of land. On one side, you've got the naturalist's forest. This is your old-growth reality, right? It's messy, it's diverse, it's packed with hundreds of species of flora and fauna, hollow trees, thick underbrush, and these incredibly complex overlapping ecosystems. On the other side, you have the administrator's forest. To a state revenue agent, all that beautiful diversity? It's just noise. It's illegible. They don't care about the beetles or the bushes. They care about commercial timber and revenue. So they just mentally filtered out everything that wasn't immediately profitable.
And to turn that mental filter into a physical reality, the Germans engineered the forest into a pure commodity machine. Here are the features of that administrative forest. They monocropped hardy, fast-growing trees, specifically Norway spruce or Scotch pine. They totally cleared out the underbrush. They planted same-age trees, and they arranged them in perfectly linear alleys. Now, the absolute crucial point here is that this made management ridiculously easy. You could forecast your timber yields with basic math. You could hire relatively unskilled labor to just follow a few standard rules. You didn't need local wisdom or intuition anymore. You literally just needed a spreadsheet.
Section 2. The cost of simplification. In the short term, this radical simplification was a resounding success. Yields absolutely skyrocketed. But that early boom was secretly building toward a catastrophic long-term disaster.
By the second or third generation of planting these identical trees, a really alarming phenomenon occurred. It was so bad, the Germans actually coined a new term for it, Waldsterben, which translates to forest death. It was a total ecological collapse. Those pure stands of spruce that grew so well at first were suddenly showing this massive retrogression, leading to a 20 to 30% production loss. Why? Because the state had so radically simplified the ecosystem that they completely broke the nutrient cycle. It was a cascading failure caused by the state's fatal blind spot. They bracketed out everything that wasn't timber, assuming those extra variables didn't matter. But of course they did. Let's break it down. Step 1. Clear the underbrush and dead snags just to keep things neat. Step 2. Without that habitat, you lose your diverse populations of birds and insects. Step 3. Without natural predators, pests that specialize in eating Norway spruce multiply unchecked. Absolute epidemics. And step 4. Without the diverse woody biomass rotting on the forest floor, the soil depletes and the forest dies. That first generation of trees had literally just been mining the accumulated ecological capital of the old-growth forest, and once that was gone, the whole system collapsed.
And you won't believe how the state responded. It really highlights the absolute absurdity of the whole situation. Having deliberately destroyed a complex ecology, the bureaucrats tried to artificially patch it back together. They called it restoration forestry. They literally had local school children raise artificial ant colonies to put back into the woods. They had to design and nail up specially designed wooden bird boxes because, oops, they had cut down all the hollow trees that the owls and woodpeckers used to live in. They were trying to create a virtual ecology while actively denying the very thing that sustained it: diversity.
Section 3. Local rules versus state grids. All right, let's pivot. We're going to take this anchoring metaphor of the simplified forest and apply it to human societies. Because historically, states have faced human populations that are just as messy and illegible to them as that old-growth forest.
Let's look at something as basic as how people used to measure things. Before the modern era, local measurements were everywhere, and they were perfectly suited to what people actually needed. A basketful or a handful meant something at a direct human scale. Over in parts of Malaysia, if you asked how far the next village was, someone might tell you 3 rice cookings. And you know what? That tells you exactly what you need to know, the time and effort the journey takes based on that specific terrain. In Europe, a plot of land wasn't measured in abstract acres, it was measured in morgen, or days of work. A rocky, steep field might be technically the exact same physical size as a flat, rich field, but it would take twice as many morgen to plow. To the locals, this was brilliant and made perfect sense. But to a state tax collector trying to aggregate data back in the capital, total mind-boggling administrative nightmare.
So we have this stark divide between customary measurement and state measurement. Customary measures were deeply embedded in practical context. A farmer just cared about how much seed was needed for a specific type of soil, or if a field could feed their family. The state, on the other hand, demands abstract, uniform surface area. They need interchangeable units, hectares, acres, kilograms. Why? Because that's the only way they can calculate taxes, monitor markets, and feed armies from hundreds of miles away.
But this wasn't just a matter of administrative convenience, it was totally about power. Think about the micropolitics of the bushel. In early modern Europe, feudal lords couldn't easily raise formal rents because tradition forbade it. So what did they do? They cheated the measurement. They'd lend grain to peasants in smaller baskets and then demand repayment in larger ones. People would get into bitter arguments over whether a bushel of wheat should be handed over heaped up high, leveled off with a stick, or shaken down to pack more in. Make no mistake, measurement was an instrument of class struggle.
Section 4. The Metric Revolution. To secure its food supply, guarantee its taxes, and stabilize the nation, the state had to solve this chaotic babel of measurement.
Now, what is deeply counterintuitive here is that standardizing these measurements wasn't just some top-down authoritarian move. It actually had massive popular support. Listen to this grievance petition from the Third Estate in Brittany, right before the French Revolution. We express our most sincere desire for but one king, one law, one weight, and one measure. The common people were absolutely sick of local lords manipulating the bushels and the sizing. So for them, a universal uniform measurement like the meter was actually an emancipatory move for equality.
If we look at the timeline for the impetus of standardization, we see a few forces at play. You have Enlightenment philosophy demanding rationalization. That pushes alongside the growth of long-distance commercial exchange because anonymous buyers and sellers need standard weights to trade fairly. And all this culminated in the French Revolution. The ultimate goal here wasn't just creating a national market, it was creating a uniform, homogeneous national citizen. An abstract grid of equal rights essentially required an abstract grid of measurements.
Section 5. Redrawing the map. Let's move to our final frontier, where state legibility literally redraws the earth beneath our feet, land ownership, and the invention of the modern cadastral map.
Before modern maps, owning land was incredibly complicated. Customary land tenure was this dense thicket of overlapping rights. For example, one family might have the right to grow crops on a field during the summer, but after the harvest, the whole village had the right to let their livestock graze there. The poor had gleaning rights to pick up leftover grain. If a famine hit, the village might temporarily redistribute land based on family size. It was a living, breathing social safety net that constantly adapted to local ecology. But to a state tax official, totally, hopelessly, fiscally illegible.
Consider a place like Novoselok village in pre-revolutionary Russia. Look at this property layout before the Stolypin reform. It looks like absolute chaos, doesn't it? This is a system called interstripping. Instead of owning one big square farm, a single household might cultivate 10 to 15 tiny, disconnected strips of land scattered all over the village. And the reason why is genius: to distribute ecological risk. If a frost hit the valley or a flood hit the riverbank, every family had at least some land up in a safe zone. It was a brilliant, complex, local survival strategy. But of course, to the central government, it just looked like irrational madness.
So the state's solution was agrarian reform. Look at the comparison here. They untangled Novoselok's complex strips, that whole interstrip survival strategy, and consolidated everything into the new, rigid farmsteads you see on the right. Notice how perfectly it mirrors what we saw in the German forest? The state broke apart the collective community so it could easily track and tax individual landholders.
And that brings us to the cadastral map. The property lines we just completely take for granted today? This map was the ultimate tool of state simplification. It took a living, negotiated tissue of human relationships and reduced it to a sterile, two-dimensional piece of paper. It replaced overlapping social duties with a taxable grid of individual freehold. In short, it made the landscape legible to the state, and therefore manipulable and taxable from the center.
Which brings us right up to the present day. We might not be out there managing 18th century spruce forests or arguing over the size of a wooden bushel anymore, but we do live in a world that is entirely mediated by digital grids, standardized metrics, and algorithms that constantly demand legibility. So, the big question we have to ask ourselves is this: what vital human interactions are being cleared away like underbrush by today's algorithms and modern administrative grids? When our systems force us into standardized digital boxes to make us measurable, what are we losing? And what will the long-term cost of that simplification be? Thank you so much for exploring this with us today. Keep asking those big questions, and we'll catch you on the next Explainer.